don't know how many of you guys know this, but they got an off-season version of Hard Knocks that followed the New York Giants and their front office around, and they look like a bunch of flaming idiots on this thing. First of all, in the first episode, when they were discussing Saquon Barkley's future, they said that they didn't pay Daniel Jones $40 million a year to hand the ball off to a $12 million a year running back, which was a little bit idiotic to me, because if Daniel Jones is as good as what you believe him to be, then why was it later on during this season of Hard Knocks, following their offseason, that they were interviewing Drake May during the draft process, and they also were really fascinated with Jaden Daniels? When you're interviewing Drake May and you're also intrigued in Jaden Daniels, that shows me that you don't have a lot of confidence in Daniel Jones being the franchise guy for you, and plus, you feel you made a really bad mistake giving him that extension, which we all knew it was a terrible decision. But yet, the New York Giants are willing to double down on it, because they say, well, why pay Saquon Barkley $12 million a year when we can use that money to pay for other areas of need? Which I don't have a problem with. And I think that's a actually really good explanation for it. It makes sense. But when you make the comment that we didn't give Daniel Jones that amount of money to hand it off to Saquon Barkley for $12 million a year, it makes you look really foolish, and it makes you sound stupid, because it makes you think that Daniel Jones is better than what he actually is. And they did slightly improve their offensive line, but this is still one of the worst rosters in the NFL. Now, the Brian Burns trade, even that was a little bit head-scratching. And when I look at the Giants overall after watching Hard Knocks, I am way more lower on them going into this season than what I was before I watched this. And I was reading people's responses about how they felt about Joe Schoen and the Giants front office after watching this thing. And there were a good amount of Giants fans that felt positive about Joe Schoen and the regime that they have up there after watching this thing. But me personally, I don't see how people feel that way, when I just think they just sounded so stupid throughout the entirety of this thing. Every episode, they said something that just rubbed me the wrong way. And when you got the owner coming out to you saying that, I don't really think us letting Saquon Barkley walk away is a good idea when he's the most popular player that we've had in recent memory. And then he also says, if he signs with the Eagles, I'm not going to be able to sleep at night. It makes you look really bad. And plus, the owner, when they finally came to the agreement that they were going to let Saquon Barkley walk, he kind of promised them that no matter what happens this year, they aren't going to lose their job because of the handling of Saquon Barkley's, contract talks. But I think that's complete BS. And if I'm the New York Giants owner and they end up winning anything less than 6 games, I'm cutting bait with everybody. Because getting rid of Saquon, to me, was a really bad decision. I understand that you have other areas of need, but you could have still paid Saquon $12 million a year, and you still could have improved the offensive line. You could have used a little bit of that money that you had left over to sign a couple of guys in free agency, and you could have drafted some guys in the draft. The Giants already don't have a good track record when it comes to their free agency acquisitions, which is why I'm not high on Joe Schoen. Everybody was trying to gas up them getting Darren Waller, Paris Campbell, and Adoree Jackson, and none of those guys worked out last year. Paris Campbell was a giant whiff. Darren Waller retired to pursue a full-time music career. I mean, you didn't have any free agency signings that have worked out. You replaced Saquon Barkley with Devin Singletary. You downgraded. I don't think they're going to have a good rushing attack. And when you have a quarterback like Daniel Jones, who already is not that good, you want to give him as many high-level players as possible. The reason why the Giants went to the postseason year one under Brian Dable wasn't because of Daniel Jones. It was because of how well Saquon Barkley played, plus with Daniel Jones playing good enough where he wasn't losing you games. He was doing enough Plus, with his athleticism, it makes your running game a little bit more dynamic. With Daniel Jones coming off a really devastating injury, is he still going to be the same athlete now that he was prior to sustaining this injury? I strongly doubt that. And when you listen to coaches and defensive players around the league talk about Daniel Jones, they don't talk about this guy in a very high regard. And I get that he hasn't had the most ideal situation. His offensive line has always been complete garbage. Ever since his rookie year, he's never had a good group of receivers. But we seem to forget that this dude was a former first-round pick and a top 10 pick, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember that there were a lot of angry Giants fans who were frustrated with the fact that they drafted Danny Pennies over Dwayne Haskins. And when you get drafted in the first round, especially in the top 10 of the draft, you're supposed to be able to overcome certain limitations. You should be able to elevate your team in some capacity. We obviously know that Daniel Jones has not played up to the standard that you expect from a first-round pick. He's played at what you expect out of a mid-round pick, out of a quarterback that you draft in the 4th or 5th round. And at this point, he's been in the league long enough that you should know what this dude is. Daniel Jones isn't going to be a top 10 quarterback. And he probably won't even be a top 12 quarterback. At best, he'll be a middle-of-the-pack quarterback, which I don't think is good enough to win you a Super Bowl. And to me, if the Broncos are taking the NFL record dead cap hit to get rid of Russell Wilson, why wouldn't you do the same thing with Daniel Jones, knowing that you don't have a lot of confidence in him? And you can't say that, well, we're going to find out just how truly good Daniel Jones is. Daniel Jones is so overhated. How's he overhated when this is the same organization that was interviewing Drake May? Like, if you go and you watch this Hard Knocks offseason with the New York Giants and you go see the episode when they're with Drake May, they really love that brother. If he was on the board when it was their turn to pick, they would have drafted him. What does that tell you about how they feel about Daniel Jones? You see, in life, I learned this about people. They'll say one thing and do the complete other. It's kind of the similar thing to when somebody's always preaching about what you need to do with their life or what you need to do with your life, but they don't take their own advice. It makes you look hypocritical. And the Giants look hypocritical when you watch them in Hard Knocks and how they go about the Daniel Jones situation, because sometimes they'll say, yeah, we got a lot of confidence in Daniel Jones, but yet you're scouting the first round caliber rookie quarterbacks, right? It was one scene when, they were discussing Daniel Jones and they were also got to the draft and they were talking about Jaden Daniels, right? And Joe Schoen looked at Brian Dable and he asked him, hey, how you feel about the Jaden Daniels kid? You know what Brian Dable said? He said, oh, man, I love him. You didn't never hear him say, oh, man, he's okay, but he ain't better than what we got now. Even they know that they effed up and they made a terrible situation. I don't get why you would double down on trying to build around that when you could just start over and keep Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is way more important to the Giants than what Daniel Jones is. Saquon, to me, was the soul of that offense. He's the main reason for why they had that surprising playoff run a few years back. But now without him, you're leaning on the unproven group of wide receivers. I love Malik Neighbors. He's about the only wide receiver who I trust on that roster. Darius Slayton is okay, but he's a number 3 fringe wide receiver 2 at best. I don't see an offense that has a lot of playmakers. Their offensive line still isn't that improved. They still have a good amount of holes on defense. Plus, they downgraded that defensive coordinator when you lose Wink Martindale. After watching Hard Knocks, what I believed about the Giants was furthermore reinforced that they're going to be, if not the worst team in the league, one of the worst this season. Because this franchise just looked idiotic. After every episode I watched, it doesn't seem like they got a good idea of what it takes to build a team. And I know some Giants fans are going to disagree and feel opposite about Joe Schoen and what the front office did. But if you go off the track record of the Giants and what this regime has done in free agency, a lot of their free agency signings haven't worked. And a good amount of their draft picks have been hit or miss. They got a couple of good players on defense, but offensively, Evan Neal is a bust, and they still are going to continue to start this guy this year. And as long as he's still out there, things aren't really going to get too better for Daniel Jones. And you can move on the offensive guard, but the Giants just aren't good when it comes to drafting offensive linemen. You remember when they drafted Eric Flowers a few years ago? Some of you guys may be a little bit too young to remember Eric Flowers, but he kind of was just as bad as what Evan Neal is, and they try to move him to guard also. So my impressions on the Giants after watching their off-season Hard Knocks is that they're going to be as bad as what I thought they are. And when I do my regular predictions later on this episode, I'm not even going to lie to y'all. I don't have them winning no more than 4 games. They're going to be terrible because they don't have a good quarterback. Brian Dable can't get along with the guys on his staff. I just don't see the Giants being anything more than a team that's going to be in the tank for Carson Beck or Shedeur Sanders sweepstakes this year.